This episode of Own the Grey is brought to you by I Am. Discover your unique talents, realize your potential, and align to your path. Take the first step to uncover your life purpose by visiting debrajones.ca/courses. Welcome to Own the Grey, a podcast to dispel the notion that aging is undesirable and setting new, positive attitudes. I'm Debra Jones, and I believe you can be vibrant and healthy throughout the best years of your life. Wil Carlos is an intuitive business coach and a belief-clearing expert who uses energy healing to transform obstacles into opportunities. Wil is a member of our Successful Healer Facebook group, and this year for my birthday, he gifted me a virtual session that he calls Align with Ease and Prosperity. And I can tell you that Wil is the real deal, getting to the point in 0.2 seconds. He's been called the human lie detector, and I found out why. And I found the session enlightening, clarifying, and powerful. And today, I invited him here on Own the Grey to talk about an issue he's identified as the helper's paradox. Joining us from Nova Scotia, Canada, here to explain what that is, welcome Wil Carlos. Hey, Wil.
Hi, thanks, Deborah, for having me. And that was a great introduction. I appreciate it.
As a healer, I help people all the time. And like you, I'm also a healing business mentor, which means I help people help people. So when you mentioned that you're working on an offering called the Helper's Paradox, of course, I was very interested. Explain to us, Wil, what is the Helper's Paradox?
Yeah, it's something that I've been noticing these entire 4 years as an energy healer. And the reason I didn't notice it before that is because I was so, like a fish in water. I was so living it that I couldn't see what I was doing all that time. And it's basically this. It's that the more you need, or the more a person needs to help, the less able they are to actually help. And I didn't see that for the longest time because I was so stuck in my own need to help, my own need to save other people. And I used to call it the helper, fixer, saver thing because I didn't have a better name for it. And it does go in those degrees that there's helping, which isn't so bad. And then there's the fixing where we know what someone else needs, but they, for some reason, can't see it themselves. And then there's the saving. And the savior thing is savior syndrome. We hear talked about all the time. And I was stuck in that for almost my entire life with a real belief that I needed to save the world. And, we can get into that a little bit later, but that is what the helper's paradox is. It's a paradox because those of us that are the most called to help, the healers or the caregivers or the parents or the social workers often end up doing more damage than good because of that internal need that we have that we're trying to meet through working with the people that we're helping.
That's really interesting. So what kinds of scenarios would you use as an example of the helper's paradox?
Yeah, great question. So I literally just finished a session with one of my clients who, without any personal details, they're a therapist. And the reason that this person started to work with me is in our very first intake consultation. Actually, it was the free session that you mentioned that you had. And we talked about the helper's paradox. And ever since then, she's been seeing how much that's at the core of her work. Instead of actually truly being of service, she's realizing, oh my gosh, all of my therapy sessions are about me and my need to help. Another great example, out of the world of business is parents. Parents that, and I'm a parent as well. I have a 4-year-old daughter, but parents that believe that their primary job is to help their child. They often end up getting lost in the overgiving and the people pleasing rather than the parenting, because parenting is not always about helping. I mean, often it is, and especially in those early years, which I'm still in the middle of. But if we believe as parents that that's our primary job instead of to teach or to demonstrate boundaries or to demonstrate consequences, for example, then we end up getting stuck in this cycle of always helping and not guiding. And then as a third and final example for now, caregivers. I worked with a woman once in a free session, and she was part caregiver to her sister, and this woman's parents weren't going to let her take over primary care as the parents got older because of power dynamics in the family. And it was really weighing heavy on her. And I was unsuccessful in that conversation to have her see that her need to be her sister's caregiver was completely destroying her ability to step into that role because of the beliefs that she had about it, the beliefs she had about her parents, and that need energy. She wasn't able to find a creative solution about how to step into that if she was so stuck in the emotional energy of being a caregiver.
It seems to me that there's a gray area or a fine line between the belief, I guess, that you're helping for somebody else's benefit or that you're helping for maybe some hidden reasons. What kinds of hidden reasons have you uncovered?
Oh, I love the way you asked that question. Well, to take a bit of a step back first, before the hidden reasons, one of the way, and because you're right, it's a very fine line. And that's why I think that this conversation really needs to be addressed and unpacked over many podcasts, conversations. I'm going to be developing a whole course around this because it's not a one and done thing. It's not, for example, create better boundaries. Tell your family that you need 10 minutes a day. It's not like that. There's a deep conversation that we need to have, and with a lot of grace and a lot of space, because we're, even as you and I talk about this, we're using the word need constantly. And I had someone who, it was in the middle of a webinar, one of my free webinars, and they thought they were so smart when they called me out on, hey, but you're saying need, that, any client that needs to work with you, but you said that we shouldn't. I'm like, okay, we're still living in a physical reality where we have words that we use regularly.
Yeah.
And need is one of those words. I'm not going to, it'd be pedantic to try to find a different word every single time. So let's just be adults about this and, and still get to break it down. So one of the ways that, as we begin to unpack it, one of the ways to know what side of that fine line you're on is your body and your body language and checking in with your body. And it was one of the first ways that I started to see when I was stuck in that need energy and when I was actually being present to the person in front of me and not coming from my own hidden agendas, which you had mentioned. So if you are ever leaning forward, if your back hurts, if you notice that you're talking really fast, if you notice you already have the answer, if you notice that you're kind of pushing things forward, either literally pushing things forward or energetically. And we can talk about the energetics of a push energy and a pull energy, which we hadn't even talked. It's not even in our notes for today, but we could get into that.
Sure.
But when you're in that push energy, that's when you're in the helper's paradox. You have an agenda. That's how you know there's some kind of agenda, and you're either helping, or worse, you're trying to fix, or worse, you're trying to save.
Where does that need come from?
Every human being is so completely different. So for me, that need came from a deep sense of guilt and shame that I picked up from my mom, who now has no memory of all these formative experiences where she shared with me about her childhood and her deep need to help others and how guilty she felt. Growing up Roman Catholic, she used to cry when she'd meet a stranger and ask if they were Catholic. And if they said no, she would be racked with guilt that this person was going to hell. And my mom has no memory of sharing all of this with me. She says, "What are you talking about? That never happened." It's very clear. I know, and I take my fish oil, so I know my brain's good. But she has no memory of that. And then when I was in high school, I'll never forget. The first thing that happened is I'd always had that bent of feeling responsible for others and feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. And then in grade 10, I read this book called The Poisonwood Bible. And it was about a family in the 1950s that went to Africa to do missionary work. And most of the family dies. Like I think it was the Congo. if I'm remembering correctly, but a lot of death, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of really challenging things. And what I took from that was that the world is broken and it needs me to fix it. And very shortly after that, I started and tried to read a book called Find Balance by Rohinton Mistry. And that was set in India, I think around the 1960s. I got about half the way through, but I couldn't handle it. I was getting basically depressed. I just couldn't handle any more of that. And I was sharing all of this with my teacher at the time in 10th grade about my job to save the world. And I want to be an actor, but I don't think I can save the world that way. So maybe I should be a carpenter where I can build houses for the poor and needy in other countries. Cause then at least I could build within my lifetime 1,000 houses, but that's not enough. So what if I really was wrestling with this, and it was a daily thing. And she said, "Oh, these are really important questions you're asking. And I have a suggestion. I'm going to bring you a movie that I think would really help." And she brought me a movie. If anyone's familiar with it, you're going to laugh out loud, called Apocalypse Now. Have you ever seen that movie?
A long time ago.
It's based on the book The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. And it's about going upriver into darkness, into the most nihilistic, existential, the world is a mean, horrible place and nothing means anything, so you should just give up now, is what I took from it all. I'd have to read it again now to see what the deeper meaning really is. But that's the movie she gave me, full of violence, and it was set in Vietnam. It was just horrible. And I watched it by myself late at night. At the only time in my life I had a TV in my own room so I could watch it late at night. It was a long movie, 3 hours long. And then I didn't speak to anyone for about 3 days. I had my first depressive episode. And I decided that it was my job to save the world. It was my job to make sure that this insanity stopped. And now my mission was to figure out how to make that happen. So it came from this deep shame and guilt that I'd been given so much when others hadn't. This guilt that I had to do more. This guilt from my mom, which I later learned with energy tools how to give that all back to her and let her be her and me be me, and we can be our own people. But it was a long journey to do that. So that's, for me, I don't want to postulate too much in each individual where it comes from. I mean, I could go through client session notes to tell you without any personal details, but it's so individual for everybody that I feel that would be a bit of a disservice. I may in a future time, but that's definitely where it came from for me.
When you were talking, I was thinking about what makes an empath. An empath simply is somebody that is very sensitive and can feel that. And I wonder if an empath is more likely to fall into the helper's paradox or not. What do you think?
I think yes. And then my deeper answer to that is it's more complex, because I feel that in our world, the energy healers of the world and the coaches of the world and empaths of the world, we have, and this is my opinion 100%, so some people may not resonate with this, and that's okay, but we've taken far too much pride in our sensitivity. And so I have many clients who they come to me with the weight of the world on their shoulders and saying things like, well, I'm picking up on everyone else's energy and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm an empath. And I say, well, okay, but is that working for you? Like, are you happy?
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm not happy because I'm picking up on everyone else's stuff, and I have no choice because I'm an empath. And I said, well, okay, well, we can change that if you'd like. Like, we can shift that. And usually the people that come to me are ready to shift that and they want to. And I'm not saying that we have to all change that, but I used to take pride in, and now I have many clients that I support to step out of that pride in being an empath, instead of, what if you could just have the awareness that, oh, wow, that person, my mom, or if you're a caregiver, for example, and the person that you're caring for, they need you right now. They're just pulsing that need. What if you could be aware of that and say, oh, okay, I'm not going to respond to that. I'm aware of it. I feel all the twitches and the triggers in my body, and I'm just going to let them have that. That's their stuff. It's not my stuff. I don't need to get a back pain. I don't need to get a headache. You can have awareness without having symptoms. You could just have an awareness. So yes, the simple answer is yes. Empaths are way more likely to have to be stuck in the helper's paradox, but it's not a life sentence. It's a chance to be more aware.
I like that. It's not a life sentence. It's about giving yourself permission to do things differently, I guess. And sometimes we have a hard time giving ourselves permission. Maybe we work through what it is, what it's all about. I mean, we can also look at how it's affecting us. So what is the downside of being stuck in the helper's paradox?
The biggest downside that I can think of is that we derive our significance in life from heaviness. And I'll unpack that. So I think it was Tony Robbins that I first heard talk about this a long time ago. So, and I know many others share it in a more eloquent way than I will, but it's to be careful of where you get your significance from. And many of us get our significance from our suffering, from our challenges, from our obstacles, instead of from our contribution, from our love, from our joy. And that's understandable because we want to give meaning to the suffering that we've had or the suffering that others have had. So it's very understandable. But the biggest downside for those that are stuck in the helper's paradox is that they're getting their significance in life from helping other people. And that always leads to more heaviness. And what I mean by heaviness is not fun, no joy, big heavy language like my mission and my purpose instead of, oh, what I get to do, what I choose to do, or hey, I'm taking care of my elderly mom because that's what I choose, instead of, well, there's no one else. It's all up to me, like it's always been. That's a heaviness. And then we get our significance from that rather than getting our significance from what if you could feel special and significant because your elderly mother needed help and you were so magical and in the flow that you manifested someone else to be the caregiver at half the cost because they just love it so much they were looking for someone to take care of, and you could just support that person part-time. And what if that was your place of significance? Of like, wow, well, that was easy. Right?
And so the handing off the responsibility would be easier once you know that not doing it is detrimental to your well-being.
Whew. I'm twitching now, and we didn't talk about that at the start because we're not doing a visual podcast. But so I'm twitching because there's an energy that's coming up, and when energy comes up, my body twitches or I yawn to let me know that there's something going on that either listeners in the future will be really reacting to all this. But that word responsibility is such a big one. Like, but who else would be responsible? If not me, then who? I've got to be. Ow, there we go. I've got to be responsible. So in our Western culture, and I'm not going to speak for the world, but I know, especially in Canada, probably in the US as well, responsibility. We're taught as kids, you've got to be responsible. Don't be irresponsible. It's like the number one value that we're taught. Yeah. Even if our parents have said things like, I really want you to be happy and follow your passion, what they demonstrated was you've got to be responsible. And often being responsible meant doing the crappiest thing that you most don't want to do because it's the right thing to do. And always the right thing to do is the one that feels the worst. So if that's our context or understanding for responsibility, then it's like we're seeking and finding all the things to be responsible for, but that also means all the things that feel the worst that we most don't want to do. So responsibility gets a really heavy, crappy connotation to it because it's not in your alignment. It's not your joy or it's not where you find your ease.
So out of obligation and into joy is what you're saying.
Yes. And did you read that off the page? Because I think that's one of the things that I wrote down. Or did you just come up with that?
I just came up with that. I guess that's a good title for you.
It's perfect. I mean, so there's this great, if anyone on here is a public speaker or a coach or you have to make videos, I'll add in this little tidbit that I learned from someone else and use it in this context. So it's a 3-part way to frame any point you want to make. So the first one is what pisses me off. So what pisses me off is when people in social work, helping professions are stuck in obligation and they're ineffective at truly changing the world because they're feeling so crappy and they're burnt out and they need so much help, but they're stuck in that obligation energy. And so what breaks my heart is that all these people that could be changing the world in such fanatical, fantastic ways are burnt out, stressed out, feeling like imposters. And so what I'm doing about it, and that's the third part. So what pisses me off, what breaks my heart, and what I'm doing about it is educating people, growing awareness around this dynamic called the helper's paradox, so that if your bliss is making cabinets, but you feel like you have to help whoever it is, that you can trust that if you make your cabinets, you will find a way to do both, if it's truly in your heart to do both. But if you refuse your magic, if you refuse the ease, and you refuse the cabinet making, for example, and you do
Mhm.
the thing you think you have to do, well, now you're just doing more of what the world doesn't need. And so, the famous quote from Mother Teresa where she said, "I'll never go to an anti-war rally, but make a peace rally and I'll be there." And she
Mhm.
understood that fine line. She understood that where we give our energy, things expand. If you give your energy to need and responding to need, you will be more needy and you'll notice and create more need around you. She knows a very controversial thing to say, but it's in that same vein of what Mother Teresa said.
Mhm. And Mother Teresa is kind of seen, from my perspective anyway, as a martyr of sorts. But
Mm.
I think that's probably the last thing she would want to be known as. What you've been talking about is similar to what I have been writing about in my book, The Successful Healer. And it's the archetype of martyr, which it kind of follows what we've been talking about. It's about seeking approval and always
Mm.
helping others and feeling unentitled to your own personal happiness. So you give it away so that you can maintain the peace and the balance for other people. What do you have to share about that?
I love that, and I love that language, and there's so many different terms, and it's great because they all can bring a different awareness, and it's as the energy and the language evolves, our understanding evolves. So, savior syndrome, martyr, helper's paradox, and then another one that I'll throw into the mix is the imposter complex. Yeah, so a lot of the things that you just mentioned, for me, I would put that in the category of the imposter complex, and I've seen that there are 8 pillars. Some of the ones you mentioned, like people pleasing and overgiving, that's one of the pillars. Crappy boundaries, it's another one of the pillars. And then a big one that you mentioned, seeking validation elsewhere or outside of yourself, that's feeling like a fraud. That's imposter complex. That's not owning your expertise, playing small. And these are all different pillars of the imposter phenomenon. So just to backtrack for a second, so many people
Mhm.
call it imposter syndrome, which I did, and I was calling it that for a long time, but I discovered that that's mostly incorrect. It's not a black and white thing, but as far as the textbooks are concerned, it's actually called imposter phenomenon because they don't really know. They
Mm,
know there's a thing there. They know there's something going on, and by they I mean psychiatrists and psychologists, but they don't
right.
really know what it is. But it's more likely a complex than a syndrome. So a syndrome is a deep issue that often requires a lot of treatment and medication. Whereas a complex is a mental construct that can be worked through, according to mainstream medicine, through talk therapy and things like that. So, what we'll just broadly say that what we're doing here is talk therapy, although it's obviously not therapy, but a broad category.
Yeah.
So even as we change the language there, it makes it not nearly so bad. So if you felt like an
Mm,
imposter or a fraud and you've been calling it a syndrome and really doing a deep dive to uproot all the things behind it, all the beliefs behind it, well, it's not actually a syndrome, it's a complex. So it's not so bad. A complex can be shifted, can be changed. And I don't know
yeah.
how long it'll take for you, but it's not so bad.
It's your perception of reality, isn't it?
Hmm.
So, the imposter complex, as it pertains to the helper's paradox, can you simplify that and explain what the connection is?
Yes, of course. So this is where this work is for me. It's still evolving, to be totally honest. So where it began in the 4 years ago, I started to notice this thing of this helper, fixer, savior thing, and that led to uncovering the 8 pillars of the imposter complex. And that was just through looking through hundreds of session notes with hundreds of different clients and started to see this pattern emerge of these 8 pillars. And I wrote it out in a mini story here that I'll read. And as I clarified that, then the language came up of the helper's paradox. So the way that I explain it is imagine that you're sitting by a lake It's a gorgeous lake, and there's an alligator sleeping over in the sunshine. And you're sitting there minding your own business, but then you start procrastinating on your work, on your mission, your purpose, the thing that you really want to do. You're procrastinating. If you're one of my typical clients, you're not putting out content. You're not being visible. You're not being seen. You're not having sales conversations, because I work with a lot of healers and therapists, life coaches, artists. So you're procrastinating in some way. Every time you procrastinate, it's like you're clapping loudly beside the lake. And the first clap, not a big deal. But then you start getting overwhelmed, because now you've been procrastinating for a while, and now you're feeling overwhelmed with all the things you haven't done. Every time you feel overwhelmed, again, you're clapping beside the lake. And then the alligator starts to get a little annoyed. And then the third pillar comes in, the inner critic, because the more you procrastinate and feel overwhelmed, the more your inner critic kicks in and says, oh, you're such an idiot. See, you're not meant to do whatever your passion or your love or your joy is. You're not meant to do this. You're such a loser. Well, now you've woken up that alligator. I call it imposter complex Allie. And he starts swimming over. And then you get into a wrestling match with an alligator. Now, if anyone here has ever been stuck in that horrible loop of procrastination, overwhelm, inner critic, and then bring in number 4, imposter complex, or feeling like a fraud, you know emotionally that it feels like you're wrestling an alligator, either for a minute or an hour or a day. And by the time you've finished wrestling that alligator, you are exhausted. So now you start playing small, and that's the 5th pillar. And you start playing small because it's just safer. You're exhausted. You can't keep this up anymore. So you stop owning your expertise, and that's the 6th pillar. You're not owning your expertise. The next time someone says, "Hey, what do you do? What do you love? What's your mission?" You go, "Oh, I'm here to help, or I'm here to give. I'm here to be of service," instead of a much more specific or detailed version. And then you give into people pleasing and overgiving to relieve the pressure, thinking it'll help. That's the 7th pillar, which is almost exactly the same thing as the helper's paradox. So people pleasing and overgiving, and the help is directly tied to the helper's paradox. And then finally, in the end, you develop crappy boundaries, and you realize that you've lost a part of you. So the crappy boundaries, where you're overgiving, people pleasing, living for others, trying to help everyone else first, that's the final way that you keep. It's like you're throwing biscuits to that alligator, just saying, "Yep, stick around. I want you to stay here as long. You please stick around. I need you." So those are the 8 pillars, and that's the little story. And the helper's paradox is just one of the ways that we feed that imposter complex.
Wow, that is a powerful visual, and one that hurt as I listened to it,
Well, because we've
because
all
I
been
think
there.
absolutely we all have, and some of us stay there a little longer than we need to, and that's kind of why the idea of the helper's paradox being a method to gain awareness, to understand what's happening here, and then to break the cycle. That's kind of what it is, the awareness, and to break the cycle, and then to find a new cycle. And I wonder, what changes would we expect to see, other than being free of that pain and that exhaustion from wrestling Allie? What other changes would we expect to see?
Yeah. So, no longer wrestling the alligator means you've got more energy. It means that when it's time to say no or create a boundary, you do it with a lot more ease and a lot less suffering. When it's time to state your needs, you can do it easily. With my wife, oh my gosh, it was the most painful thing a few years ago before I had made these shifts. And I realized that I was keeping my business small because I didn't want to have awkward conversations about, "Sorry, I'm not actually available to do the dishes this afternoon. Like, you're not going to have a clean kitchen by the time dinner comes. I'll do them when the workday is done." And that sounds like such a simple, silly thing. But for me, it was so uncomfortable. Family history and blah, 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 blah. It was so uncomfortable. And when I saw those beliefs, and I was able to step out of those beliefs with the method that I use and work with clients on, it changed everything. Then I was able to say, and it was uncomfortable at first, and it took a bit to work through, to say, "Sorry, honey, I am not doing the dishes. I'm working till 5, and I'll do the dishes then." And to have that awkward moment. So, more ease with boundaries, less procrastination. And most of all, I think, or sorry, there's more, but a big one is the inner critic begins to fall away. So it was about, it was a year ago. I was walking in one of my favorite places in the world. It's called Windhorse Farms. It's here in Nova Scotia. And it's 100 acres of woodland that they've been stewarding for a generation, and organic farm and a lake. And my family was out in the canoe, and I was taking a little walk by myself and walking under this acorn tree and picking up the acorns, because in our family we have this little tradition. We try to find the most perfect acorn, and then whoever finds the most perfect one gets a treat by the end of the walk. So I'm looking for the most perfect acorn, and I keep finding perfect acorns. It was like 10. I can't hold them all in my hand. There's so many perfect acorns. And I had this thought, this moment of, what changed? I'm here walking in ease and peace with my family, taking the weekend off, and my business is moving, clients are signing up, I'm not just having ideas, but they're actually coming to fruition out in the world. And I'm not beating myself up every single day. What changed? Like, the seeds that I've planted can now grow. I've been planting seeds for 20 years, but they could never grow. Now they're actually coming to fruition, and the fruit is coming on the trees, so to speak. And I realized it was because I stopped poisoning the soil with all that self-hatred, all that inner critic BS. And now it didn't mean that I was going to be an overnight success, but it meant that now the seeds that I planted could actually grow. And I think that's the biggest benefit of stepping out of the helper's paradox, is letting go of that guilt and that shame, the BS, the blankets of shame, the blankets of should. If you can take off from this podcast listening, if you can take off just one blanket of should or shame, then waking up tomorrow is going to be 10 times easier. And if you can take them all off, you're going to notice yourself waking up with actual energy and clarity and focus and joy. And then someone will ask you to do something that totally breaks your boundaries. They'll say, oh, could you pick up so-and-so? But you've actually got really important things at that time that normally you would move. But this time you say, because you didn't wake up exhausted, this time you say, no, actually, I can't. And you don't try to create a workaround. You don't try to make it easier on the other person. You just say, no, actually, I can't. Wow. And you let them be in that. And then together you'll create a solution. But it means that you've stopped taking on trying to, make sure that the world works out for everyone.
That is so powerful. And it feels so much lighter.
Yeah.
Now, that pause that I hear you do, what I read into that was that it was so much lighter for me. What you have been talking about has lightened my own load. So it's very interesting. And I love talking with you, Wil, because there's so much going on, and not just the words that come out of your mouth. It's that energy. It's that the work that you do, the magic that you offer, that helps people figure things out without you telling them the answer.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
It's quite phenomenal to work with a healer that allows you to discover it for yourself. And that's what I find is one of your greatest gifts, Wil.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I try to walk that fine line between, as you mentioned in the introduction, because that is one of my gifts, is I can see when people are lying to themselves, when they're out of alignment with what they say they want, and they're actually out of energetic alignment. So one of my gifts is to be able to say, oh, sorry, you just said, you want to stop being a caregiver, but you're actually lying. That wasn't true. You actually do want to keep doing that. Which, that's pointing directly at something without the idea in the background that they should stop being a caregiver. I don't care if you keep being a caregiver. What I care about is that you drop the belief or the need that you have to be. And that if you can drop that, now you can say, oh, I do want to be a caregiver. And I'm going to create someone to give me a break 2 times a day, because that would make it all a million times better. So yeah, that's the line I try to walk between pointing directly and very specifically at the misalignment that I see, and not letting you off the hook about it like a dog with a bone. And then also with the ease and the space that I don't care what you do with that. Like, I just want you to get that, and then you do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Now, you've just had a Zoom event that is about the helper's paradox, and there's a couple of things that you're offering the listeners now. Would you like to share that?
I've created a page just for resources on this very thing, so that if all you need is a few more videos, maybe a free webinar to help you shift this, then great. That's all you need. You don't even need to pay me money or hire me. Awesome. Great. Love it. And then there's options to go deeper if you do want to hire me or talk to me in person, of course. So that page is My Spiritual Clarity. It's my website, myspiritualclarity.com/helpers paradox. And so on there, you'll see the next link to the next webinar, because I try to put those on monthly now, a Helpers Paradox webinar. And in that webinar, the first half, we go into these dynamics of the 8 pillars of the imposter complex alley, but with a bit more detail and a bit more kind of straightforward. And that's just me talking straight at you for about 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes. And the second half is really cool. It's a chance for you to jump up live. You may not get picked depending on how many people are live on the webinar, but it's live. And I do on-the-spot belief clearing with whoever is brave enough to jump up and be a guinea pig. And we just jump in and we do belief clearing right on the spot. Might take 2 minutes, might take 5 minutes, might take 10 minutes. And I get through as many people as I can. So that's the format of the webinar. And then on that same page, there's going to be other videos, like I mentioned, and eventually I'll be adding PDFs and all that fun stuff. But for now, there's just going to be a few videos and a link to the next free webinar.
Beautiful. So you also offer the work that you do in podcasts and membership groups and private sessions as well. So all of those things can be found on your website that I'll put a link to in the show notes.
Yeah, it's all on the website, which is myspiritualclarity.com.
So if you were to leave us with one last thought, Wil?
This is my hope for everyone listening. I decided that I was no longer going to sacrifice my energetic alignment, call it your truth, for anyone or anything. And that would be my hope for everyone listening, is that it's not some big declaration of I'm going to stand up for the truth. No. I'm talking about a much simpler, when you notice physically, energetically that you've stepped out of alignment, that you're people pleasing, that you're overgiving, all those things, that you just go, no, I'm not doing that. So what else can I create? What else can I do? So that would be my hope for everyone listening.
That's really powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your experiences and your wisdom with us. And if anybody wants to go a little further with understanding their place in that helper's paradox, then Wil is the guy. So go ahead, connect with him, and you can start to enjoy your life again and have the lightness back in your life and to allow you to do the things that you're here to do.
Yeah.
So thanks, Wil. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah. Thank you, Debra, for having me. I really appreciate the chance to get this out to more people. And you've got a wonderful, clear energy and platform that helps people like me and others who have other great messages as well to get it out to the world. So thank you for the space that you create, the space that you're being to make this all possible.
Go to ownthegray.ca to follow us and listen to more great episodes. Or you can listen on Apple, Spotify, Google, iTunes, Amazon Music, Stitcher, and more. This episode of Own the Gray is brought to you by I Am. Discover your unique talents, realize your potential, and align to your path. Take the first step to uncover your life purpose by visiting debrajones.ca/courses.